I know that there's been conversations between youth workers around how do we have these conversations, but also when we have these conversations. Now, you've done a lot of work around the world, and I'm really curious just about your thoughts around what do you see as the appropriate age and stage to introduce conversations when we are talking about things such as healthy relationships, when things such as consent, which is in mainstream media conversations at the moment, is coming up, or even issues such as pornography. What in your kind of experience has been the correct age and stage to bring these issues up in a youth work setting?
Sure. I mean, obviously, this is an important question, an area of discussion. The term that I always use, and people in my sort of world always use, is, you bring things up at the age appropriate level, but you don't not bring it up because a person is a certain age. You talk about things in a way that people can absorb, young people can absorb at whatever age level they're at. And there's more art than science to this practice. In other words, some 10-year-olds are really sophisticated, and you can talk to them in a way that you might talk to a 19-year-old, but some 10-year-olds maybe not so. So you have to be really flexible. But I would say, so for example, I mean, some of this stuff is harsh. I mean, some of the subject matter here, especially when we're talking about violence and harassment and abuse, you don't want to totally traumatize them by scare them in a way that, immobilizes them. So it's like parents have to think about what are the appropriate times to bring up certain things with their kids, but they also have to, we as adults, and not just parents, have a responsibility to kids to help them develop tools to navigate the real world that they live in. And so, for example, a lot of people will say, well, pornography is, really, we don't want to talk about pornography with a 10 or 11-year-old, but yet we know from research that the typical age of first exposure to pornography is 11. So if you're going to say, as a parent or as an adult, say a youth worker, I don't want to talk about pornography with my 11-year-olds because that's kind of too young and we don't want to freak them out. Meanwhile, they just pick up their phone and they're immersed in a porn culture that has no hesitation about influencing them. Then you're in a sense giving over the power to socialize those young people to the porn industry. And I mean, seriously. So now, does that mean that I'm saying that you have to say X, Y, or Z or so? No, I mean, I'm just saying that if we're gonna be realistic about the world in which these young people are living, and we're all living, but certainly they're living, they're already exposed to enormous amounts of brutality and sexualized violence, whether it's in the porn industry, the music videos and music they listen to, the TV and movies that they have accessible on their phone. That's the world that they live in. So I think being a responsible adult is helping them to see and navigate that space, that, the media space in this case, in addition to their peer culture and their larger personal experience. So I think it's having a balance between not wanting to freak them out by overstating how dangerous and violent the world is and how sex is, connected to violence. You don't want them to be totally, traumatized, but at the same time, you want to give them tools to be able to understand their experience and their exposure to media in ways that can be empowering to them. And I think, the key here is like it is in so many things, is education. In other words, to the extent that youth workers can be educated themselves, that they can absorb the best thinking in the 21st century about the relationship between media narratives and media culture and real life, the ways in which porn, for example, helps to normalize certain kinds of sexuality, especially men's dominance over women, men's abuse towards women. To the extent that they can be themselves, the youth workers, know all of this, then they can figure out ways using their own creativity and skill to make comments, to bring up points, to use teachable moments, to when you're sitting and watching TV with a kid, for example, or watching a movie, if you yourself have already been trained in media literacy and understanding some of the things that are happening on screen and part of media literacy, part of being thoughtful about media is who makes the media, who promotes, who green lights projects. In other words, who's behind the camera, whose stories are being told, who are the writers, who are the producers, who are the directors. For example, what is the gender of the people who are making these movies? What is the racial and ethnic background? How does that shape the way that they tell stories or whose stories they tell? These are all things that you need to know if you want to be media literate. And if you know this, then if you're sitting and watching a TV show or a movie with young people, you can make points like, oh yeah, do you know that, you realize that that girl in that scene didn't say one word. She didn't say one word. She was just sitting there as like kind of eye candy. And the whole thing was taking place between boys and young men who were at the center of the discussion. And don't you see what's going on there is that it makes the point that the real actors in the world are boys and men, and girls are just there to look good. And if you know this, you can then make those kind of interventions, and you can help them see more thoughtfully. And I would use this term, you can help them develop the tools of intellectual self-defense against the negative and pernicious effects that some of their media consumption has on their psyches and on their understanding of the world.